There are a lot of things to say about the POW issue. It held up the signing of the armistice primarily because we wanted some mechanism whereby anti-communist soldiers would not be sent back to
It would be
North
rewarded,
Korea or China.
as it were.
Well, if they were anti-communists, they should go to South Korea or Taiwan, but not go back to a communist country. And that was based on the treatment that the Russians gave to Germans who had surrendered to them. And so it was a perfectly reasonable position. But it ignored what was going on in the POW camps, which was a virtual political war, sometimes open warfare, where the communists on the North Korean side would get everybody together and organize their camp and then fight with the anti-communists on the South Korean side, except the North Koreans are much better organized. South Koreans tended to have youth group leaders. The South Koreans were the anti-communist POWs. They were the ones who wouldn't join with the communists, even though they had been communists.
Or they had been in the North Korean army.
They had been captured in the North Korean army or as guerrillas.
Yeah, okay.
Or they got into the camps and figured the U.S. was going to win this war sooner or later, and they would go to South Korea. And there was a lot of anti-communist indoctrination among those North and South Koreans. A lot of South Koreans were captured fighting on the North Korean side.
Okay.
And so Syngman Rhee also, in addition to these fights that were going on, he decided to sabotage the armistice a couple of months before it was signed by letting 25,000 prisoners go free. These were anti-communist ones, or probably anybody that realized they were going to go free on Tuesday morning if Syngman Rhee let them. And that infuriated the American command, which was running everything. I mean, the UN had almost no role in Korea. And so that managed to delay the armistice for several months. But to me, what most Americans remember, I think, is the Americans in North Korean and Chinese POW camps because of the shocking things that came out when they came home. The most shocking being that 21 of the POWs stayed behind. And I've actually met 2 of them. They all eventually made their way back to the United States. They went from North Korea to China. Some of them stayed there decades. Others came back fairly quickly. But they were just confused young men. In one case, a black guy who said he had no future in the United States, and the Chinese promised him a job and an education, which is entirely plausible. He's now runs a chop suey restaurant in Memphis. He's a very funny guy. And he got his education, his wife, and his job in China. But he told us in an interview that he wanted to come back to the United States because there's no ceiling on your ambition, whereas there is in China. It was just a fascinating interview. Very interesting person. So 21 stayed behind, and they were supposed to have been brainwashed, when in fact the political indoctrination was fairly light compared to what most people believe. I've read a book by a black guy who was a POW, and he said they would come to him and talk to him about imperialism, and he'd say it's a bunch of hogwash, and they'd come back and try and do it. And the worst thing they ever did was make him stand on the ice in his bare feet for an hour or so, teach him a lesson. So there were a lot of it was overdrawn, but it fed into this idea we couldn't win the Korean War. We were stalemated. What happened to the World War II generation when men were men? And you see then in the mid-50s all of this talk about the decline of American manhood. And Rebel Without a Cause, James Dean's most well-known movie, you know, his father's going around in an apron. He tells his father, why don't you slug mom in the mouth for Christ's sake instead of letting her push you around? I mean, you see it in Hollywood, you see it in stories and themes on TV. And so that particular POW episode, and it went beyond that because a lot of Americans died in captivity. And one thought, well, it's the brutality of the North Koreans or the Chinese. But there were a lot of British POWs. Hardly any of them died. And so when studies came out, and there are some excellent studies by sociologists on this, including a book called Mass Battle and Behavior in Captivity that I think is the best book, it turned out that the British knew how to keep their morale up much better than the Americans, and these guys would just give up. commit suicide or just die.
Like Bridge on the River Kwai in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I don't think it has anything to do with American manhood. It has to do with young people who don't know where Korea is, that get 6 weeks of infantry
One of the
training.
things, maybe this American manhood thing is a perpetually cycling idea, because as you will remember, this was something that tremendously bothered Theodore Roosevelt and other people who were the sons of the Civil War generation and who had never proven themselves. In his famous comment, "I want a war, any war," but we need a war.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, one of the fascinating things about Korea is how well officered the American military was. Almost all the officers who fought in World War II fought in Korea.
Yeah.
Ridgway, MacArthur, Clark.
Yeah.
You can't hardly name anybody who didn't fight there, and that made losing that war or not winning it all the harder to take.
This excerpt is brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law, the leader of reform in legal education and a leader in multimedia education for the public. To view the full interview and for a full listing of MSL's programs, log on to mslaw.edu.